Hello, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to this tutorial where we are going to talk about using random numbers with Arduino. Specifically, we're going to talk about the random function and the randomSeed function. And by the end of this tutorial, you should have an idea of how to use these functions and some of the intricacies of the functions. So let's go ahead and jump right in. In this tutorial, you're going to need 3 LEDs, 3 220 ohm resistors, you'll need your Arduino board, you'll need a breadboard, and you'll need at least 1 jumper wire. Setting up this circuit is very simple. We're going to be using pins 2, 3, and 4. So just take one of your resistors, put it in pin 2 on the Arduino, and then hook the other end into the breadboard. And then take the long leg of the light emitting diode, of one of the light emitting diodes, place it in the breadboard, connect it to that resistor, and then put the short leg in one of the long ground rails on the breadboard. And then just do this for pins 3 and 4 with the resistors and LEDs. And then finally connect a jumper wire from the ground on the Arduino to that ground rail on the breadboard. And that's it. Go ahead and plug in your Arduino board. So here we are in the Arduino IDE. And what I'm going to do is open up a file here in the examples. And I go to Basics, and I'm just going to go to Bare Minimum. And what this gives me is just a void setup and a void loop. Nothing's in it, but it just kind of sets that up for me. Hey, that's less typing that I have to do, so I like to do that. So again, what this is going to be about is random numbers. And what we're going to do is set up 3 LEDs. You just saw the circuit, and we just want to randomly turn on one of those LEDs. To do that, let's go first declare some pin numbers for the LEDs. So we have 3 LEDs. We'll call them LED 1, LED 2, and LED 3. And they are at pins 2, 3, and 4 respectively. Now let's create a variable that is going to store the random number that we generate. We're going to make it of data type long. So why are we declaring the random number variable as a long? Well, the reason we're doing that is because the random function actually returns a value that can be really big, and it's stored as a long data type. And so really the only difference between an integer data type and a long data type is that the long data type can hold a much larger value, over like 2 billion. So that's why we go with the long data type. Again, it's going to allocate more storage for that number. Now in this case, we really don't, for our purposes, we're not going to be generating some giant random number. We're going to be generating a number between like 2 and 4, so we could use an integer. But for our purposes, it really doesn't hurt to use the long. So now let's jump into the setup, and what we're going to do is we want to be able to look at the random numbers that get generated. So let's go ahead and start serial communications. And then we also want to set our LED pins as outputs. Let's use the pin mode function to do that. So we've set the mode of LEDs 1, 2, and 3 as outputs. And the only other thing I want to do in here is I want to send a little message in setup that will get displayed on the serial monitor that lets us know that when we've started a new sequence of random numbers. So let's do that. So now when we look at the serial monitor, we will know when a new sequence of random numbers begins. Okay, let's go into the loop. The first thing we're going to do is assign a random number to our random number variable. So to do this, we just use the random function. So what we're doing is we're saying random number, that's the variable that we declared up at the top. We're setting it equal to the output of the random function. And we're passing the random function the number 5. So let's take a quick look at the syntax of the random function on the Arduino reference pages. Now, if you know me, if you've done any of my courses, you know that I love the Arduino reference. I'm there all the time. And here we are at one of the reference pages for the random function. So if we look at the syntax, what's cool is that it can take 2 different parameters. So you can either send it just the max number, so I just sent it the number 5, or you can send it a minimum and a max, so you can pick between a range. So the max number that you send, what it actually returns, if we look down here at the return, it sends you the max minus 1. So that max number is not inclusive. So in our case, it's going to return a random number between 0 and 4. Again, because that max number will not be included in the random numbers that get generated. So it's going to send us a number, either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 is what we'll get back. So let's go ahead and take a look at the numbers that this function generates. And if we want to look at the numbers it generates, we're going to have to print those numbers to the serial monitor. So let's do that. So now I'm going to go ahead and upload this to the Arduino board, but I'm really not at this point interested in looking at the LEDs. What I want to look at is the output on the serial monitor. So let's open up the serial monitor, and what I'm going to do is reset the Arduino board. And I'm also going to turn off auto scroll. Okay, so I reset the Arduino board, and this is what I'm interested in. So here we started the new sequence of the random number. That's when setup occurred. And then here is the sequence of random numbers. And what I'm going to do is just take a quick screenshot of those numbers. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit reset again. So I just reset the board, and then I'm going to turn off auto scroll, and we're going to come back up here, and we're going to take a look at this random sequence. And now I'm going to go ahead and open up that screenshot that I had. Okay, so here's the screenshot from the previous time we started, and here is the next time we started. I want you to let's take a look at these numbers. So the first one was 2. The second one was 4, 3, 3, 0, 2, 4. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that the random numbers that get generated using the random functions are the exact same from one instance to the next. So it's just this long reel of randomly generated numbers. Does that make sense? So it's going to be the same quote-unquote random numbers over and over again. It's called a pseudo-random number is what it ends up being. Okay, so this, is kind of an issue. I mean, if we're trying to have real randomness in the program, we don't want the same numbers to repeat over and over and again. So how are we going to fix that? Well, let's try using the randomSeed function. All right, so randomSeed, what it does is it initializes a pseudo-random number. So let's see. The parameters it takes is a long or an integer. So we have to pass a number, and what it does then is generate a seed. So let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to do it up here in the setup right at the bottom. So I've written the randomSeed number, and I've just kind of come up with an arbitrary integer, 42, to put in there to seed it. So let's go ahead and run this and take a look at the serial monitor and see what it looks like. Okay, so here is the start of a new sequence. Let me get the previous sequence and let's compare it. Okay, so here was the previous sequence. We've got a 2. Oh, that's a 4 this time. Here's a 4. That's a 3. Hey, this new seed is definitely different from when we weren't using the randomSeed. That's cool. What I'm going to do is take a quick screenshot of this, and then what we'll do is run the program again and see if it is indeed, giving us some random sequences. Okay, so here's a new sequence. Let's open up that new screenshot and let's compare it. Okay, 4, 3, 4, 3, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. Okay, so we can see what's happened is, although the sequence is different from when we weren't using randomSeed, that it's still the exact same from one to the next. So we've generated a new sequence of pseudo-random numbers, but it's the same sequence. So it doesn't seem like that has really helped us all that much. So how are we going to overcome this? Well, lucky for us, it's written right into the documentation. So let's go ahead again and check out the Arduino reference page for the randomSeed function. So it says here, if we want to generate different values on subsequent executions of the sketch, then we need to provide some type of fairly random input. And what it recommends is using the analog read function on some unconnected pin. So that's a really neat idea. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to get rid of 42. We're going to type in analog read. So we are passing the randomSeed function a function in itself, and it's the analog read function. So if you recall, what analog read does is it looks at one of the analog pins that you specify. In this case, I'm specifying analog pin A0. And since we have nothing connected to A0, when it reads a value from there, it's it's just kind of going to read any type of noise that might be at that pin. And it's going to return a number between 0 and 1023. And generally speaking, with the unconnected pin, we just really don't know what it's going to return. So let's go ahead and see if this works. All right, so we've uploaded it. Let's take a look at the serial monitor. Okay, so here's a start. Here's a random sequence. Let's open up the previous random and let's see if it's different. Okay, so this was the one we were using the randomSeed, but we're using the number 42. This is the new one with our analog read input, so we're getting 4, 3. Okay, so this is different. Hey, that's a good start. Let's go ahead and reset this and then compare if this, so I'll take a quick screenshot of this, and let's see if this will be different from the next time we run it. So I'll just reset the Arduino board. Okay, so I reset the board. We got some new numbers. Let's go ahead and open up that previous sequence. Okay, so we can see from one time to the next, it was definitely different. Okay, so it looks like we've successfully kind of generated some random numbers. So that's pretty cool. Well, now what we want to do is light up some LEDs based on these random numbers. So how are we going to do that? So all I should have to do to turn on some LEDs based on this random number is use this to do a digital write to one of the pins. So let's go ahead and do that. So what this line of code will do is write high voltage to the pin number specified by random number. And right now the pin number being specified by random number is a pin between 0 and 4. Because remember that 5 is not inclusive, 0 and 4. But for our purposes, I don't have any LEDs attached to pins 0 or 1. So what do we have to do here? We have to modify this random. So if you recall, we can insert a minimum number. So I'm going to say the minimum number will be 2. So now random is going to return a number that is between 2 and 4. Because remember that final number is not inclusive. So random number will be assigned either 2, 3, or 4 every time we go through the loop. And then every time we go through the loop, we're going to write that different random number. Now what I want to do also is delay some time and then turn the LED off so that we can see the effect. So let's do that. So I've added a delay of 100 milliseconds and then I do a digital write random number low. So that's going to turn the LED off. Now notice this random number is the same random number here. So we don't assign a new random number before we get to this line of code. So we can ensure that that variable will stay the same from when we turn it on to turning it off. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the board and see what this looks like. We can see that our LEDs are doing fairly random things, which is neat. And you can tell, I mean, this is pretty easy to do. This isn't anything crazy. There are a couple intricacies that we talked about with the random function and the randomSeed that you should know about now. So hopefully this has been a helpful tutorial. Hey, I cannot wait to see you next time.